The ballroom shimmered beneath cascading crystal chandeliers, each prism scattering golden light across polished marble floors. Soft violin music floated above the low murmur of wealthy conversation, blending with the faint clink of crystal glasses. Servers in crisp white gloves moved gracefully between round tables draped in ivory linen, balancing silver trays topped with delicate appetizers arranged like edible art. Every detail had been curated for elegance. Every corner radiated success. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of it all, perfectly tailored tuxedo, confident posture, controlled smile. He had already delivered his keynote speech, an inspiring address about equity in education, about building bridges for children born on the wrong side of opportunity. The applause had been generous. Cameras had flashed. Influential hands had shaken his firmly, congratulating him on both his philanthropy and his rising empire. Yet now, as donors settled into their seats for dinner, a strange quiet pressed against his chest. He had built his fortune from nothing, at least that was the story newspapers liked to print. But they never described the loneliness that came with success. They never mentioned how large rooms could feel when filled with people who admired your achievements but did not truly know you. Ethan loosened his cuff slightly and scanned the room. Investors laughed too loudly near the stage. A tech magnate gestured animatedly with a champagne flute. A city councilwoman posed for photographs near a floral arrangement as tall as a tree. Everything gleamed, and yet something tugged at him. His gaze drifted toward the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom. That was when he noticed her. She stood just inside the entrance, small against the towering gold-trimmed walls. Around her clustered several other children, students from the Foundation's partner schools, brought here as symbolic reminders of the cause. They wore their best clothes. Some fidgeted with excitement. Others whispered to each other, pointing discreetly at the towering dessert display. But she stood slightly apart. Her braids were neatly done, each tipped with beads that caught the chandelier light. A pale yellow dress brushed her knees, clean and carefully pressed, though the fabric was thin for the coolness of the air-conditioned room. Her shoes were polished but worn at the edges. She wasn't staring at the decorations. She was watching the food. A server passed near her with a tray of miniature crab cakes. Her eyes followed the tray instinctively. She swallowed, almost invisibly, then folded her hands in front of her as if reminding herself to stay still. Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had grown up attending corporate functions with his father, a junior accountant who had spent most of his career trying to climb invisible ladders. Ethan remembered standing at the edges of rooms like this, aware of how out of place their modest suits looked among designer labels. He remembered hunger too, not always for food, but for acceptance. For acknowledgement. But he had never questioned whether he was allowed to eat. Without quite realizing why, Ethan stepped away from the donors approaching him and began walking toward the girl. As he crossed the room, a few heads turned. People assumed he was greeting guests, networking, managing optics. No one noticed the small shift in direction until he was nearly at the doors. The girl spotted him approaching and straightened immediately. Her chin lifted, shoulders squared, as though bracing for correction. He slowed his pace, softening his expression. "Good evening," he said gently. Her voice, when she answered, was polite and careful. "Good evening, sir. What's your name?" "Amara." The name lingered in the air. Between them. He smiled. "That's beautiful." She dipped her head slightly, unsure how to respond. Up close, he noticed the way her eyes moved, alert, observant. Not shy exactly, just measuring. "Are you enjoying the event, Amara?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Her answer came quickly, automatically. He followed her gaze again to the buffet tables where servers were now arranging plates for guests. The scent of roasted herbs and warm bread drifted faintly through the room. "You haven't had anything to eat yet?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Why not? We were told to wait." "For what?" "For someone to tell us we can." There was no resentment in her tone. No accusation. Just fact. Ethan felt the words settle heavily in his chest. He glanced toward the adult chaperone standing a few feet away, busy in conversation with a foundation coordinator. No one seemed to notice the children waiting quietly at the edge of abundance. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Her eyes flickered with honesty before politeness returned. "A little." He crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level. The music swelled behind them, but his world narrowed to the space between her steady gaze and his own. "You know this event is for you and your classmates, right?" he said. She hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Then you don't have to wait." Her brow furrowed faintly, as if trying to reconcile his words with the rules she'd been given. Then she did something that made his breath catch. She looked up at him, not boldly, but bravely. Can I eat with you? She asked. The question was quiet, almost fragile. Not can I have food. Not can I get a plate. Can I eat with you? He blinked. With me, he repeated, just above a whisper. She nodded, fingers tightening slightly against the fabric of her dress. If I sit at your table, maybe they won't mind. In that moment, Ethan understood what she was truly asking. She wasn't just hungry for dinner. She was hungry for belonging. For assurance that she wasn't an ornament in the room. Not a prop for a fundraising brochure. Not a background detail in someone else's generosity. She wanted to sit at the table. With him. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Around them, laughter rang out from a nearby group of investors. Silverware clinked. The violinist transitioned into a brighter melody. The world continued its polished rhythm. But something inside Ethan cracked. He had spent years building companies, acquiring competitors, mastering negotiations. He prided himself on reading people quickly. On identifying leverage points. On solving complex problems with decisive action. Yet here stood a 9-year-old girl who had just revealed a truth his board meetings had never addressed. All the money in the room meant nothing if a child still felt she needed permission to sit. He forced himself to smile, though emotion edged his voice. Amara, he said gently, you don't need permission to eat here. She studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of pity or insincerity. But, he continued, offering his hand slightly, I would be honored if you would sit with me. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then her expression shifted. A small smile emerged first, tentative, like dawn breaking. Then it grew, bright and luminous, transforming her entire face. She placed her small hand in his. It was warm, steady, and as Ethan Caldwell straightened and began walking her toward the center of the ballroom, past rows of stunned donors and glittering place settings, he realized something profound. For the first time that evening, he wasn't leading a charity event. He was simply answering a child who had asked the bravest question in the room. Can I eat with you? The murmur in the ballroom dimmed as Ethan guided Amara toward the head table. Conversations didn't stop entirely, but they softened, like wind slipping behind glass. Eyes followed them, some curious, some confused, some calculating. Ethan felt the shift instantly. He had walked into boardrooms during hostile acquisitions with less tension than this. He pulled out the chair beside his own. Here, he said gently. Amara hesitated only a second before sitting down carefully, her back straight, her small hands folded in her lap. The white linen napkin shaped like a swan seemed almost as large as her forearm. She looked at it as though unsure if she was allowed to touch it. Ethan took his own napkin and placed it on his lap deliberately. She mirrored him, movements precise and respectful. A waiter appeared, uncertainty flickering across his face. Mr. Caldwell, he began quietly, the student's table is arranged. She's dining with me, Ethan replied calmly. The waiter paused, then nodded. Of course, sir. Across the table, a venture capitalist raised an eyebrow but said nothing. A woman in diamonds offered a thin, polite smile before returning to her wine. The first course arrived. Roasted vegetables glistening with olive oil, herb-crusted chicken, warm bread still steaming from the oven. When the plate was set before Amara, she froze. Her eyes widened slightly. Is this, for me? All of it, Ethan said. She looked at him again, as if confirming the rules had truly changed. Then she picked up her fork. Her first bite was small and careful. She chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then something shifted. Her shoulders relaxed. Her eyes brightened. A quiet, almost disbelieving smile touched her lips as she took another bite, this time with less hesitation. Ethan felt his chest tighten again, but not painfully this time. More like something long dormant stirring awake. You like it? He asked. She nodded quickly. Yes, sir. It's really good. Have you ever had herb chicken before? She shook her head. No, sir. He smiled faintly. He had once complained about a chef overcooking rosemary. The donors resumed their conversations, but the dynamic had changed. Every few minutes, someone glanced their way. Some whispered. A few looked impressed. Others looked uncomfortable. Ethan didn't care. He leaned slightly toward her. So tell me, Amara. What do you want to be when you grow up? She paused mid-bite, thinking carefully. This wasn't a question she would answer lightly. A teacher, she said finally. A teacher, he repeated. She nodded. Yes. So kids don't have to wait. The simplicity of her answer cut deeper than any criticism he had ever received. So kids don't have to wait for what? He asked gently. For someone to see them, she said matter-of-factly. For someone to call on them. For someone to say they can try. Her voice carried no bitterness. Just clarity. Ethan swallowed. He had built his empire on speed, rapid growth, rapid scaling, rapid returns. Waiting had always been something he eliminated from equations. Yet here was a child explaining that entire futures could stall in silence. He looked around the ballroom. Crystal, gold trim, designer gowns, custom suits. And near the back, he noticed the other students still seated together at a smaller table, politely waiting for direction before touching their plates. A subtle heat crept up his neck. He stood slowly. The movement drew attention immediately. Chairs creaked. Glasses paused midair. He didn't walk to the podium. He didn't adjust the microphone. He simply remained at his place and lifted his glass. The room quieted. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice steady but no longer rehearsed. "We've spoken a lot tonight about access and opportunity. About leveling the playing field." Soft nods circled the room. "But I realized something important a few minutes ago." He glanced down at Amara, who looked up at him with mild concern. "Access isn't just about buildings or scholarships. It's about dignity." The word settled differently in the air. If a child walks into a room created in her honor and feels she has to wait for permission to eat, then we haven't done enough. A ripple moved through the tables. He continued, voice quiet but firm. "From now on, every event hosted by this foundation will seat students at every table. Not separately, not symbolically, together." Silence. Then, scattered applause. It grew gradually, not explosive, but genuine. Some donors clapped enthusiastically, others more cautiously. A few remained still, uncertain how this change might shift the tone of future galas. Ethan lowered his glass and sat back down. Amara tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. His expression softened. "No," he said gently. "You did something very right." She frowned slightly. "I just wanted to eat." He smiled faintly. "And you reminded me what this is all about." She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether he meant that. "Will the other kids sit here next time?" she asked. "Yes. Even if they don't know how to use all the forks." He chuckled under his breath. "Especially then." That earned a small grin. The second course arrived, creamy risotto with shaved parmesan. Amara watched how Ethan held his fork and copied him again, determined not to make mistakes. He noticed. "You don't have to do everything exactly like me," he said softly. "I don't?" she asked. "No. You belong here just as you are." She absorbed that slowly. Across the table, the venture capitalist cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell," quite a bold statement. Ethan met his gaze calmly. "The right ones usually are." The man gave a thin smile, unsure whether to challenge further. As dessert was served, a delicate chocolate mousse layered with raspberries, Amara's eyes widened again. "Can I really have this too?" she asked. "All of it," Ethan repeated. She took a bite, and this time she laughed quietly, an unguarded, childlike sound that felt almost foreign in a room so curated. Several heads turned at the sound. Ethan realized something then. For years, he had measured success in valuations, headlines, acquisitions. But this moment, this small laugh over chocolate mousse, felt heavier than any contract he had signed. Halfway through dessert, he noticed the other children beginning to relax as well. Staff members, prompted by quiet instructions, were inviting them to join different tables. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Less performance, more presence. Amara looked around the room thoughtfully. "Do you always sit up here?" she asked. "Usually." "Is it lonely?" The question caught him off guard. He considered lying. "Yes," he admitted instead. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. "You can sit with us next time," she offered casually. "At school?" He blinked. "At school, yes. We have pizza on Fridays sometimes." He laughed, genuine, surprised. "That sounds like an excellent invitation." She smiled, pleased with herself. As the evening wound down and guests began to stand, shake hands, and prepare for departure, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not achievement, but alignment. He looked at Amara finishing the last bite of her dessert, carefully wiping her mouth with the napkin as she had seen others do. "Thank you for eating with me," she said politely. His voice was softer now. "Thank you for asking." Because in asking that simple question, she had done more than request a seat at the table. She had reminded a billionaire that generosity without inclusion is incomplete. And as the chandeliers dimmed slightly and the last notes of violin faded into applause, Ethan Caldwell understood something with absolute clarity. The most powerful change doesn't begin with a speech. It begins with a child who is brave enough to say, "Can I eat with you?"